Marx, you may recall, preached the doctrine of revolution. Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. To the group of British intellectuals, the idea of revolution seemed wasteful of human resources. And so these people sought a subtler method through which they might implement socialism in England. During the course of one of their meetings, as they discussed this need for a subtle technique, one of their members, and we're not quite sure which one, told the group a story out of ancient history, and perhaps you remember this from your high school studies. The story of the Second Punic War, and specifically the challenge to the Roman Empire by the Carthaginians under the leadership of Hannibal. Remember Hannibal? He revolutionized warfare by coming across the Alps with elephants as his chief armament. And now he stood on the very plains north of Rome, threatening the heart of the Roman Empire. Rome was under the control, under the leadership of a man named Maximus Quintus Fabius. And one thing that might be said for Fabius, he was intelligent enough not to fight Hannibal on Hannibal's terms and on Hannibal's battleground. He recognized that if he led the Roman legions out onto the plains north of Rome and engaged Hannibal in a frontal attack, he'd probably be defeated. And so Fabius worked out a method of warfare revolutionary for his times. Rejecting the idea of frontal attack, he chose instead to fight Hannibal through indirection, gradualism, bits and pieces. And utilizing this method, he gave additional centuries to the Roman Empire. Now, as this group of British intellectuals told themselves this story, they excitedly saw the prospect of applying the Fabian method to their specific problem. And before this evening was over, they had formally organized themselves as the Fabian Society of London and agreed on the Fabian tactic as the method they would use to implement socialism in England. Now, this is not quite as simple as it sounds. What they proposed was to bring socialism by evolution rather than revolution. They proposed to go the legislative route. And the moment that you mention legislation, you're talking about control of an organization which can nominate and elect candidates to public office. Such an organization in England and in the United States is called a political party. They took a look at the political structure of Britain of their times and determined that there were two strong parties, the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party, neither of which was vulnerable to what Shaw called permeation. But they noticed also a third group, made up for the most part of radicals, malcontents, people who couldn't find a home in either of the two major parties. And it was into this body that they moved, giving it a sense of direction and destiny, a set of precise objectives to be accomplished, motion, peerless leadership. The name of this organization became the Labour Party of England. Now, I won't recount for you the history of the Labour Party and what it's meant to Britain, except to call to your attention that in the year of 1945, the Labour Party, surrounding the nucleus of the Fabian Society, smashed through to a great victory, unseating one of the great men of our times in the prime ministership, Winston Churchill, and bringing to the prime ministership Clement Attlee, a member of the Fabian Society from his early youth. Now, you may say, well, what does all this have to do with us?
The life we're living today is the result of 100 years' influence, subtle manipulations, lies, and hidden agendas that have been thrown at us from certain societies, organizations, and we're here to tell you about one or two of those today. We're actually at Bernard Shaw's house, and most of you know Bernard Shaw because he was a playwright with plays such as St. Joan. But there's another side of Bernard Shaw that a lot of you don't know, and that's his membership of the Fabian Society. And we're here to tell you a little about that side of his life and who the Fabian Society represents. I just want to read you a little quote here. This from the British Catholic Family News. It's a news service of the National Association of Catholic Families. And this article appeared in the American Catholic Weekly, The Wanderer, December 11th, 2008. And it is with permission of the author. Writing in 1992 in Fidelio magazine, the Frankfurt School in Political Correctness, Michael Minicino observed how the heirs of Marcuse and Adorno now completely dominate the universities, teaching their own students to replace reason with politically correct ritual exercises. There are very few theoretical books on arts, letters or language published today in the United States or Europe which do not openly acknowledge their most negative, destructive criticism possible of every sphere of life, which would be designed to destabilize society and bring down what they saw as the oppressive order. Their policies, they hoped, would spread like a virus, continuing the work of the Western Marxists by other means, as one of their members noted. To further the advance of their quiet cultural revolution, but giving us no idea about their plans for the future, the school recommended, above other things, 1. The creation of racism offences. 2. The continual change to create confusion.
Change is good.
3. The teaching of sex and homosexuality to children. 4. The undermining of schools and teachers' authority. 5. Huge immigration to destroy identity. 6. The promotion of excessive drinking. 7. Emptying the churches. 8. An unreliable legal system with bias against victims of crime. 9. Dependency on the state or state benefits. 10. Control and dumbing down of media. 11. Encouraging the breakdown of the family. One of the main ideas of the Frankfurt School was to exploit Freud's idea of pansexualism, the search for pleasure, the exploitation of the differences between the sexes, the overthrowing of traditional relationships between men and women. To further their aims, they said they would attack the authority of the father, deny the specific roles of father and mother, and wrest away from families their rights to as primary educators of their children. Abolish differences in the education of boys and girls. Abolish all forms of male dominance, hence the presence of women in the armed forces. Declare women to be an oppressed class and men as oppressors. Munzenberg summed up the Frankfurt School's long-term operation thus: "We will make the West so corrupt that it stinks." And I'm sure that you can recognize a lot of that agenda going on right now, today, in present times. We've got Robert Theobald today. He's going to tell us about the history of the Fabians and join the dots for you. And Robert, would you like to tell everybody out there who's watching this and connect the dots for them and tell them how this all links in?
Yeah, I'll try to do that, Fern. You started off talking about the Frankfurt School of Communists. Well, we can link that. We can make a link there to George Bernard Shaw pretty much straight away. This is a quote from the Dublin Evening Herald, 3rd of February 1948, and Shaw says, "I am a communist, but not a member of the Communist Party. Stalin is a first-rate Fabian. I am one of the founders of Fabianism, and as such, very friendly to Russia." So you've got a link there straight away. But of course, the Fabians were, I shouldn't say were more subtle, I should say are subtle. They were and they are. Although they supported communism, lots of the Fabians actually disapproved of what was going on in Russia. But Sidney Webb and George Bernard Shaw, who started the Fabian Society, they went over to Russia in about 1934 on a visit. I think they both met Stalin, actually. George Bernard Shaw, well, Sidney Webb, then when he gets back to England, he's ostensibly the writer of a book which was called, I think it's called Soviet Communism, the New Civilization, more than 1,000 pages. But anyway, in about 1950 something, a Soviet KGB colonel, I think his name is Bogolepov, Colonel Bogolepov, or something like that. He actually spilled the beans. I think it was a congressional hearing in the United States. He spilled the beans, and he told everybody that that book was actually written by him in the Soviet Foreign Office. So that will show you the degree of cooperation between the Fabians and the Soviet Union, at least the Soviet Union in Stalin's time. But you need to know a little bit about this Fabian society, because it was started around 1884, and it's got communism associated with it right from the very beginning. For example, Karl Marx's daughter, Eleanor Marx, she was one of the first group. Engels is associated as well. I've got a little book here. I've got a little booklet here, which was put out from Australia. There's a quote from Karl Marx here. Actually, I just find it because it's he's talking about about communism, and it's quite a shocking quote, really. Yeah, there's a quote here from actually from Karl Marx himself in Murracut's book. This is the book Options. Fabians have carefully told us that Marx was under no illusion about his Das Kapital being rubbish, stuffed with statistics to pad it out. Just before it was published, he wrote a letter to his friend Engels, dated 2nd of April 1858, in which he stated quite frankly, the whole Scheisse, which means shit in German, because he was a German, as you know, the whole Scheisse is to be divided into 6 books: 1 capital, 2 landed property, 3 wage labour, 4 state, 5 international trade, and 6 world market. So that's a quote from, and that's quite interesting there, because you've got when he says the world market, of course we've got this globalisation now, which of course is pure Marxism actually. But to get back to the origin of Fabian society, it's the 2 biggest figures in it are George Bernard Shaw, we're at his house here today, and Sidney Webb. And George Bernard Shaw was an Irish man. He was a playwright, he was an author, he was originally, earlier on, he was a journalist. He was a perfect front man for the Fabian Society. He was a public figure. The ladies loved him especially, and very rich ladies and blue stocking type of ladies thought he was marvellous. He was a good front man. Sidney Webb was the other one of the double act. He was a sort of a little insignificant little fellow with a squeaky voice, and he was the kind of engineer behind it. He was the one that understood the legal matters, and he understood the way the civil service worked, and he understood the way the British government worked. So he could supply that technical side of it, you see. The next question is, because how did they actually put all this into operation, and what did they actually do? Because they're so such a little bit known about them, and yet they've had such an enormous effect. How did they do it? Well, first of all they decided that, let's go back to the name, the Fabian Society, for a start. The Fabian Society is named after Fabius Cunctator, who was a Roman general. Cunctator means delayer in Latin, and he was the Roman general that was sent out from Rome to hold back Hannibal, to keep Hannibal back from the city of Rome. Now Hannibal had a very, very powerful army. Carthage was a very powerful state, and Hannibal was going for Rome. Fabius was the one that was sent out to try and hold him back, and he did it in a very unconventional way for the times. He used delaying tactics. He used what would today be called terrorism. He used all sorts of tactics like that. He basically letting the enemy make the mistakes, and he was terribly criticised by his own and by the people in the city, by the Roman people in general. But he he actually delivered what he set out to do, which was to let Rome have enough time to assemble a sufficient army to do battle with Hannibal and to overcome him. You see, and after that, of course, the Romans gave him a great deal of acknowledgement, and they were very thankful to him. And then he became dictator at a certain point. But he was that's where they get the name from, you see. Because at that time, in 1884, not many people, certainly not the common people, would have any knowledge of the classics. So they wouldn't really understand where that name comes from. In the early days, they're basically pushing socialism. This is what they're out to do. Some people say, what's the difference between socialism and communism? Well, there isn't really very much, actually, but in fact, the USSR, the name of the USSR, Soviet Union, it was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It wasn't the Union of Communist Republics. It was the Socialist Soviet Republics.
Yeah, that's right.
They wanted to push communism. Shaw and Sidney Webber and the Fabians, they wanted to do it in a different way. They wanted to do it in a gradual way. They wanted to use gradualism, the same way that Fabius had used it. They knew that they couldn't achieve what they wanted straight away. So they thought, well, the only way we can do it is to do it on a very, very slow way, and we'll use influence. We'll use our subtle influence. They knew how to write articles and so on. But incidentally, in the first few years of the Fabian Society, it's recorded that they were giving 700 public lectures a year.
Wow.
Now that's an awful lot of public lectures, isn't it? You know, and they would be giving those to trade unions and well, really anybody that would listen.
Yeah.
You see, so that's how they got the thing going.
Yeah.
Now, what actually the thing is, what actually motivated them? That's the interesting question. What motivated these guys to do it? You see, and well, not only guys, because there was ladies as well. There was Eleanor Marx, who was the daughter of Karl Marx.
Mm-hmm.
Incidentally, two of his other daughters committed suicide, the daughters of Marx. So they were obviously very unhappy.
Yes.
Anyway, there's other women. There was Emmeline Pankhurst, the famous suffragette.
Really?
She was in it. Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah. Annie Besant.
Yeah.
Annie Besant is the Theosophist.
Yeah.
Which is basically is occult. Is an occult belief.
Yeah.
It's
they had a lot of teachings from the East, didn't they?
Yeah.
From India and whatever.
Yeah, Annie Besant. She's famous. Yeah, Annie Besant she actually promoted this man called Krishnamurti.
Yeah.
To be the new Messiah. You see, but that kind of fell through. But this is the occult side of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. These are the early ones. But then they realised that to make their progress, they had to work with the trade unions, which they did.
Does that link them in with the Labour Party?
Well, yeah, they're very close to the Labour Party, but I wouldn't say they were close to the rank and file of the ordinary working man, the ordinary rank and file of the Labour Party. I wouldn't say that at all.
But do we have them in government now? The Labour members in government?
Oh yeah, blimey!
So that's how they get their influence today.
We've got 200 members of Parliament who are members of the Fabian Society.
Wow!
And it's been like that pretty much down the line. I think in the time of the Attlee government, which was the government that came in after the war.
Yes.
That when Churchill was kicked out in 1945, Attlee government came in.
Yes.
There were more than 200 Fabians in that Parliament as well.
Right. So modern day Fabians. I've seen a picture of Tony Blair against the Fabian logo, the famous window.
It's the Fabian window. It was designed by George Bernard Shaw, and it's actually got George Bernard Shaw himself and Sidney Webb, the co-founder of the Fabian Society, and they're hammering at a world which is on an anvil to change it. They've got a group of men and a group of women on the window, which are Fabian men and Fabian women. They're dressed up in 16th century clothes, by the way. I don't know why they did that, but they were. A fascinating part of the Fabian window is the shield, which is above the world, which is on the anvil. The shield shows you the Fabian wolf. It's the Fabian wolf in sheep's clothing. It's a black wolf, and he's got a white sheepskin on him.
Yeah.
See, so that will show you how crafty they were, and they were actually having a joke with people. Shaw was when he commissioned that.
Oh, Shaw commissioned them.
Oh yeah, he commissioned that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
They've got other symbols as well, actually. There's one here, which is you can see it. This is on the Fabian regional and government thing, and it's nearly all these Fabian publications have got the Fabian tortoise.
Hold it up.
And what does it say on the tortoise, Fern?
When I strike hard.
And
That's on the logo.
yeah, and if you go to New York, you can actually go to, there's a part of New York called Turtle Bay.
Oh,
which is where there was a Fabian colony around there. So in the park there's a little column, and it's got the Fabian tortoise on it.
Fabian society is not just in this country. Then it's in America as well.
No, it's all over.
It's all over.
Yeah, I mean the Fabians, the Fabian who went out from England to more or less proselytise America for the Fabian cause was Graham Wallis.
Yes.
And he would have been the one that would have been in touch with people like John Dewey, the educationalist who basically changed the whole American education system.
Yes.
To change it over to socialism.
If this sounds a little bit sweeping for the viewers, but we recently put out a DVD of a gentleman called Norman Dodd, and he was the chief investigator of the Reece Committee, and that was set up pre-80s. He died in the 80s, so it goes way, way back there. And he was investigating the tax-exempt foundations of America. And that really does involve us here. It's not an American thing only. It's more like charitable trust, we'd call them here, wouldn't we?
Well, yes, it's interesting you should say that, Fern, because the big Norman Dodd talks about the Ford Foundation.
Yeah.
He talks about the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. What's the other one he talks about?
Rockefeller
the
Foundation.
Rockefeller.
Yeah,
the Rockefeller.
And it was the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, wasn't it? That actually admitted to him that that their agenda was to melt America into Soviet Russia, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. Who was it? Rowan Gaither, wasn't it? Rowan Gaither, I think.
That's right,
Rowan
yes,
Gaither said that we're under presidential special order to so render America similar to Russia that America and Russia can be comfortably merged. It sounds absolutely bonkers. But it's true.
It's true.
Yeah.
He admitted it. And also we know that these foundations, especially the Carnegie Foundation, is funding education over here. And they're the ones that are putting a lot of the socialist and Marxist literature in the schools. You can see it now to this day. The Bournemouth, Southampton universities both have funding from the Carnegie Endowment Foundation in America. Rockefeller is concentrating on the American education, and Carnegie does the international. I mean, look it up, you'll find it. But R. Coones, C-O-O-N-E-S, and look for Norman Dodd on Google Video and watch it for yourself. It's going to join a lot of dots for you, and it goes way... These are the people that are funding and pushing this from behind, aren't they?
Well, yeah, it's fascinating you should say that, Fern, because if you go to the London School of Economics, they call it was expanding very fast 100 years ago or thereabouts. In fact, they used to call it the empire on which the concrete never sets, and so the London School of Economics was actually funded partly by Rockefeller.
Right.
So you get that.
Yes.
But you're talking about the Carnegie endowment. But that's just to tell you a little bit about present day situation. One of the trustees of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace is actually Lord Carr of Kinlochard. Now, he's just been to the Bilderberger meeting in Greece. He's a trustee of. He's a Rhodes trustee. He's a Carnegie Endowment for International Peace trustee, and he's also a Fulbright trustee. But we're not talking about him at the moment.
Yes, because the Rhodes scholars tie up again with something else. This is a huge big web we've got here, isn't it?
Yeah, we're talking about the Fabians.
Yes, we go back to the Fabians, so we'll be here all night.
Yeah, talking about George Bernard. Let's go back to George Bernard Shaw first.
Yes.
In this book, The Brotherhood of Darkness, which is by Dr. Stanley Monteith, is an American gentleman. Now, in that book, he's got an important quotation from George Bernard Shaw. It's on page 48 of Brotherhood of Darkness. And Shaw says here, "I also made it quite clear that socialism means equality of income or nothing, and that under socialism you would not be allowed to be poor. You would be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught and employed, whether you liked it or not. If it were discovered that you had not character and industry enough to be worth all this trouble, you might possibly be executed in a kindly manner. But whilst you were permitted to live, you would have to live well. As far as I know, I was the first socialist writer to whom it occurred to state this explicitly as a necessary postulate of permanent civilization." That is that comes from his book, An Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism and Capitalism. It's what it is. It's Fabianism is elitism, and you can track it back to Plato. Plato thought that things were best managed by a benevolent dictator.
It's not necessary for me always to look as genial as I'm trying to look now. Of course, I can put on the other thing, for instance. Now that is what I call my Mussolini study. They, by the way, I think in justice to Signor Mussolini, I ought to tell you that he has a very wonderful head. He has a wonderful brow which comes down to here. But the difficulty is that he can't take it off. Now, if you watch me, I can put on that imposing look that terrifies, the Mussolini look. But, now just watch. I can take it off. Now Signor Mussolini cannot take it off.
But by a benevolent dictator who knew best how you should live your life and what you should do.
That ties up a little bit with, as I was reading out before we started talking here, to further the advance of their quiet cultural revolution, but giving us no ideas about their plans for the future, the school recommends, among other things, and one of those was dependency on the state or state benefits.
Yeah.
And as you were just reading out there,
absolutely,
it's completely total.
Well, if you come, actually, where we are at the moment, we're at St Lawrence, which is in Hertfordshire. About 5 miles over there is Welwyn Garden City, but that is based on Fabian philosophy. There's also another one as well. Actually, the first garden city was Letchworth, which is up that way, about a dozen miles. Mm-hmm. And Letchworth actually has what they call a settlement. Yeah. Settlement in inverted commas. A settlement, that's a Fabian precept, and the first settlement was actually Toynbee Hall in East London. Mm-hmm. That's where these well-heeled Fabians would go and do their charity work. You see, at the Toynbee Hall.
In upstairs, downstairs.
Yeah, because it actually comes from it actually comes from the philosophy of Ruskin.
Yes.
Because Ruskin said, he was a professor at Oxford, and he said that the only way that we can maintain the British Empire, which he considered to be the most superb empire that's ever existed in the world, he said the only way that we can actually maintain English civilization is to spread it to the lower classes.
Yes.
You see, so, and that way we can maintain our empire. Oh, that is part of the strand of where it's coming from, you know.
Yes.
One man, appointed to a newly created professorship at Oxford, led the charge in teaching Oxford undergraduates the new imperialism. Professor Quigley explains. The new imperialism after 1870 was quite different in tone from that which the Little Englanders had opposed earlier. The chief changes were that it was justified on grounds of moral duty and of social reform, and not as earlier on grounds of missionary activity and material advantage. The man most responsible for this change was John Ruskin. Ruskin spoke to the Oxford undergraduates as members of the privileged ruling class. He told them that they were the possessors of a magnificent tradition of education, beauty, rule of law, freedom, decency, and self-discipline, but that this tradition could not be saved and did not deserve to be saved, unless it could be extended to the lower classes in England itself and to the non-English masses throughout the world. If this precious tradition were not extended to these two great majorities, the minority of upper-class Englishmen would ultimately be submerged by these majorities, and the tradition lost. Based on these new justifications, the same immoral policies of conquest and subjugation found new support. The empire was now not only a matter of moral duty, it was a matter of self-preservation. If the ruling elite failed to expand the empire, their civilized way of life would be lost to the unwashed masses. It was a powerful message, and it had a sensational impact on one of Ruskin's students. The student was so moved that he copied Ruskin's lecture, word for word, and kept it with him for 30 years. He also, with a handful of other Ruskin devotees, went on to establish and fund the network that Quigley referred to as one of the most important historical facts of the 20th century. The student's name was Cecil Rhodes. If you've heard of Cecil Rhodes, odds are it hasn't been within the context of him being that guy who created a secret society to control the world. However, you may have heard of the Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford, or maybe the term Rhodes Scholar, a title given to students who studied under his program. Maybe you've heard of the African nation of Rhodesia, or Rhodes University located in South Africa, both named after Rhodes. If you've ever bought a diamond, perhaps you've heard of the De Beers Diamond Company, a South African diamond monopoly established by Rhodes. Each of these stands as a testament to the extraordinary life and influence of Cecil Rhodes. But the most significant thing Rhodes established during his lifetime doesn't bear his name and remains almost completely unknown. This, despite the fact that the secret society he founded in 1891 and its subsequent instruments continues to operate to this day.
I think when they say empire, they mean more like national identity roots, don't they, rather than the colonial empire.
I think that's changed a bit, actually. If you talk about empire, I'm sure people like Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb were very, very conscious of power,
yes,
and the power that this country had,
yes.
But they didn't necessarily look at it in the conventional way of nationalism as you or I might look at it. Their idea was a bit more subtle than that. In fact, the Fabians were directly involved in dismantling the British Empire.
Oh,
they were the ones that started it all off.
Yes.
They even had one of their Fabian front organisations, the Fabian Colonial Bureau, that was involved in it all. And you could say, well, why would they want to do a thing like that? Well, they regarded the empire as it stood as an obstacle to the spread of communism.
I see.
So it had to be had to be knocked down. And then you get people like Nkrumah in Ghana, and I think Kenyatta from Kenya, and lots of different people from the empire came to England to be educated in Fabian ways, you see.
Oh, I see.
And they were very much involved in that. They basically knocked the empire down. They wanted to do it, and they did it.
Yes.
You see.
That ties up a little bit. I've just been thinking here, and a friend of mine went to a Fabian meeting, and she was absolutely appalled because the speaker there was speaking out against nationalities, and she was speaking out against private properties, that sort of thing. Now, doesn't that tie in with, if we wander off a little bit here, but it doesn't really wander off because it's all under the same umbrella, as it were, sustainable development.
Well, sustainable development is a way of that's a very, very nice sounding thing, actually. It sounds lovely. It's a thing that everyone aspires to in there, I suppose. But in actual fact, it's sustainable development, the political concept of sustainable development, is a very, very evolved thing, and it is in essence the promotion of world communism. That's what it's about. Even the Soviet Union had the promotion of sustainable development in their Soviet constitution, because if you think about it, if you want to spread your communist power across frontiers, what better way of doing it than via the environment? You say, well, of course, my factory here, it's producing some smoke, and it blows over onto over the border onto your country. Obviously, we've all got to get together to solve these problems. It's a very clever way of promoting communism, and I think it's in Dr. Stan Monteith's Sustainable Development syllabus, which I haven't actually got here, but you can get it off his website on www.radioliberty.com. He tells you, he's got your quotation there from, I think his name is Karl Blois, who was the Moscow correspondent for the Daily World or something. It's it was a United States paper for communists. Anyway, Karl Blois was his name, and it's Bloice, and he was an associate of Gorbachev. He said the environmental movement promises to bring more people into our orbit than the peace movement ever did. So they're using it to promote socialism, world government. You see, obviously everyone that's that's sensible wants to preserve their environment. Of course we do, but we don't have to have communism to do it. We can do it in a more intelligent and better way than that.
It's one of the tools that they're using then. Obviously global warming, the controversial global warming, is a way of getting us to accept it.
Well, you can tie straight back to the Fabians now, because I told you that they've always promoted the things they want to do via their front organisations.
Yes.
There's been lots of them.